कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदनंदन व्रजजन रंजन यशोदनंदन व्रजजन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीजन वल्लभ
Prabhuji, you are on mute, Prabhuji.
No, Prabhu, I'm not on mute. It's clear.
Sorry, Prabhu.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you. But I'll mute others.
Okay. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopichana Vallabha Giri Paradari Jaya Gopichana Vallabha Giri Paradari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Panachari Yamuna Tira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jam Vishnupada Paramahansa Pradhyaksh Astuta Sadasya Srimad Isra Ingreshe Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. ISKCON संस्थापक Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jevam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Prabhupada Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai. Jevam Vishnupad Srila Kur Kishore Das Maharaj ki jai. Jevam Vishnupad Satchidananda Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai. Jevam Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarva Sri Jagannath Das Maharaj ki jai. Jai Sri Rup Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Sri Ji Gopal Bhattadasa Sri Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Namacharya Srila Das Thakur ki jai. Prem Se Goshi Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Vaik Dadara Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopal Sham Kund Radha Kund ki Varnan ki jai. Shri Shri Gaurangi Bangaloreshwar Bhagwan ki jai. Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. गंगा माई की जय, अपने माई की जय, भक्ति देव की, तुलसी देवी की जय, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय, श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय, ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, इस्कॉन वर्तमान गुरु की समावेद भक्तों की जय, और प्रेमानंद हरि हरि बोल. All glories to the assembly Lord. This all glories to the assembly. This all glories to the assembly Lord. This all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Shri Prabhupada ki jay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam. Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Ashtaprayeshva Patreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtigi. Hare Krishna. So welcome you all to the Saturday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are discussing from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 7, Text 1 to Text 22. So here actually we see that in the previous chapters, Vidura has been putting forward questions to Maitreya Rishi, and Maitreya Rishi has replied to the questions put forward by Vidura. And based on those answers that he has got from Maitreya Rishi, Vidura further puts forward some questions, which we will discuss in the first half of this chapter. So that's why it is entitled as Further Inquiries by Vidura. So in the first sloka we start with, Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, O king, while Maitreya, the great sage, was thus speaking, Vidura, the learned son of Vaipayana Vyasa, expressed a request in a pleasing manner by asking this question. So in a spiritual matters, the disciple asks the question in a very pleasing manner, and the spiritual master also replies in a very pleasing manner. It goes the text to Viduruvacha Brahman Kadam Bhagavatas Chinmatrasya Adhikarinah Leelaya Chapi Yujyeran Nirgunasya Guna Kriyaha. So translation, Vidura said, O great Brahmana, since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the complete spiritual whole and is unchangeable, how is he connected with the material modes of nature and their activities? If this is his pastime, how do the activities of the unchangeable take place and exhibit qualities without the modes of nature? So here there are some very important points which we will discuss here. Now, major important ones are the Lord's connections with the material world and the Jiva's connection with the material world. So the Supreme Lord Krishna is a spiritual whole, he is complete and he is unchangeable. Now, when we say he is complete, we are all a small part and parcel of the Supreme Lord Krishna, whereas he is the complete whole and is a spiritual whole. So our bodies are made up in this material world of three modes of material nature and all the material elements, but the Lord's body is spiritual in nature, consisting of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. And also, the Lord is unchangeable. Now, everything in this material world, there are two things. One is matter and one is spirit, of which we are all composed of. The material bodies are composed of matter and spirit. The spirit is the spirit soul inside, which does not change. But the material body which we have outside, which covers the spirit soul, is changing: birth, growth, old age, disease, death, and so forth. It goes through 6 transformations. But the Lord's body is spiritual in nature and it does not change. So here, Vidura is asking Maitreya Rishi that the Lord is complete spiritual whole and he is unchangeable. But how is he connected in this material world, consisting of the 3 modes of material nature? And how about his activities also? Because Vidura is asking this question for the interest of the common man, to clear the confusions that may be there with the common man. If this is his pastime, how does the activities of the Supreme Lord, which is unchangeable, take place and exhibit qualities without the modes of nature? Now, the Lord's body is Lord is the absolute truth. Absolute truth means the Lord, his activities, his pastimes, his qualities are all absolutely nature. So there is no difference between them. So they are all transcendental. The Lord's activities are also transcendental in nature as much as the Lord himself. So the question is, how now the Lord is Satchidananda, whereas we are not. So many philosophers point out that the living entities and the Lord, they are one and the same. In one respect, yes, the soul being part and parcel of the Supreme Soul or the Supreme Lord, in terms of quality is the same, but in terms of quantity, we are all Anu and the Lord is Vibhu. We are all a very minute parts and minute spark and part and parcel of the spiritual spark of the Supreme Lord. So the common man has got a doubt that how can that Lord who is unchangeable, who does not change, when he appears in this material world and performs his pastimes, which comes under the three modes of material nature. So all our activities in this material world are composed of goodness, passion, and ignorance on various degrees. So how does that Lord who is unchangeable, and when he comes and performs in this material world, uh, how can he perform without a change? Now, example is given here that if a magician creating a cow, now a magician can create a cow, but he is not a cow but he is a magician, but he is also a cow because he has created a cow form of a cow to show others. So the same way, the Lord is the Supreme Lord. Even though he appears in this material world to perform pastimes and activities, he does not change or he does not get involved in the three modes of material nature. Another example that is given is about prison house. A king visits a prison house, maybe to free some prisoners who can be freed early. But the king does not get affected by the implications of the law that he has created. Now, the king has created the laws for the prison house, but when he goes to the prison, he is not implicated by the laws that he has made, but he visits the prison out of his goodwill. So similarly, the Lord is transcendental. His activities are transcendental even when he appears in this material world. And his activities are as good as the Lord himself. If not, how could a great liberated devotees like Sukadeva Goswami get attracted by the activities of the Lord? So sometimes people with full fund of knowledge, they speculate and they say that there is a difference between material body and soul. So how come when the Lord appears, his activities need not be conditioned? The conditioned soul's activities are displayed through the medium of the three modes of material nature, whereas which are more or less perverted in appearance, but the Lord's body and body himself and the Lord himself are one and the same, and the Lord's activities are displayed which are non-different from the Lord himself. So in a way, the Lord does not get subjected to the laws of material nature, even though he appears in a material form externally for us. In whatever form he appears, he is spiritual in nature. For him, there is no difference between the material and the spiritual energies, because he is the source of all these energies. He is the controller of these different energies. All these energies that are created by the Lord are under his control, whereas the living entities are under the control of these energies. So the Lord, even though he creates these energies, he doesn't come under the control or purview of these energies, whereas the living entities are under these energies. Many examples are given. Like one time, Bhrigu wanted to test Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu as to who was God. Brahma got angry. Shiva got angry. But Lord Vishnu, on the other hand, he did not get angry. On the other hand, when he was stamped on the Lord's chest by Bhrigu Muni, the Lord comforted him, saying that you may have got hurt by my hard chest. So the Lord is pure goodness. He does not get agitated by the three modes of material nature. Now, similarly, there's an example given that Lord Shiva was angered by Cupid, but the same Cupid could not disturb the Supreme Lord. So the Lord is Saguna by the internal potency, but he is Nirguna since he is free from all material qualities as he is not in touch with the material energy. Actually, the Lord performs the activities like a designer. Example is given like a designer. He designs, someone else manufactures, and someone else sells it. Once the designer has sold it to the manufacturer, he has nothing to do with it. So he creates through Brahma, maintains the creation through Vishnu, and finally annihilates through Lord Shiva. He is not attached to the creation, material creation, even though he is the controller and proprietor of all the energies that he creates. He is not attached to the creation. A child may be attached to a toy that he plays with, but the Lord is full in himself. He does not require anything. So he is detached from the entire creation. The next sloka, Arjuna says, boys are enthusiastic to play with other boys or various diversions because they are encouraged by desire. But there is no possibility of such desire for the Lord because he is self-satisfied and detached from everything at all times. Now, the Lord is not subjected to Maya like the Jivas. He is Atma Rama. He is full in himself. He is completely self-satisfied. And so he does not have any desire to fulfill like us. Now, in our case, when we get something, suppose we get 1 crore of rupees, still we may not have anything in money in hand, but if the moment we get 1 crore, we may think if I would have got 5 crores, it would have been better. And if we get 5 crores, we might think if I would have got 10 crores, I would have been better. So, but the Lord is full in himself, he is complete in himself, and he does not have any desire like living entities like us. We are full of lust, anger, greed, envy, illusion, pride, and so forth. But the Lord is free from all these anarthas. And not only that, the Lord expands himself by his energies in multi forms of self-expansions as well as separated expansions, just as fire expands itself by heat and light. So the Lord is full in everything, is the proprietor of everything, and that exists in both the material and the spiritual world. Everything is within the Lord, but still the Lord is completely detached from all that exists. Though the Lord creates everything, he is completely detached. He is not attached like conditioned souls like us. Then we go to text number 4. By his self-sheltered potency of the three modes of material nature, the Lord has caused the creation of this universe. By her, he maintains the creation and conversely dissolves it again and again. So the Lord creates this material manifestation for the conditioned souls like us who think they have become God. So the three modes of material nature are for further bewilderment of the conditioned souls. Now, we all think either we want to enjoy separately from the Lord or that we have become God or we want to become God. So the three modes of material nature are created for the bewilderment of conditioned souls like us. So we are bewildered by this illusionary energy and we consider ourselves a part of this material creation due to our desire to exploit this material nature. And thus what happens is that we get entangled in material activities life after life. So the material world is not for the purpose of Lord, but for the Lord creates this material world not for his own purpose, but for conditioned souls like us who want to be controllers due to the misuse of this God-gifted minute independence. We all have a minute independence. Lord has given a very minute independence, and there is a tendency in us to utilize this minute independence to enjoy or to become controllers. Actually, cannot become controllers. We can be controlled, but because we have that desire, that I want to be a controller or I want to be the Lord of all, then the Lord facilitates and gives an opportunity to go through and understand and realize whether we can be real enjoyers or not. So then we go to text number 5. So then Vidura says, he's asking, the pure soul is pure consciousness and is never out of consciousness, either due to circumstances, time, situations, dreams, or other causes. How then does he become engaged in nescience? So here Vidura is asking Maitreya, the pure soul is pure consciousness. The soul actually that is there within the body is pure in consciousness, either due to circumstances, whatever it is never out of consciousness. So how then does this pure soul become engaged in nescience? So nescience means ignorance. So here Vidura is asking how that living entity can become forgetful of his real identity as a pure spirit soul and identify with matter unless it is influenced by something beyond himself. So the soul is spiritual in nature, as mentioned, and it has got the same quality as the Supreme Lord. And here Vidura is asking how come the soul identifies with matter, that means the spirit is higher than matter. Without spirit, matter cannot exist. With the soul within the body, the body is functional. So the spirit is more important than matter. So here Vidura is asking, how come the soul identifies with matter? So there must be something beyond all this, which is the controlling potency. So the conclusion is that the living entity or the jiva is influenced by the avidya potency, avidya or ignorance, which is confirmed in Vishnu Purana and also in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto. So in Bhagavad Gita also, in chapter 7, Lord explained that the soul is para shakti. And in the Vishnu Purana also, it is mentioned as para prakriti. That means these are all higher in nature or superior in nature. The soul is also, as I mentioned, a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord as a potency of the Supreme Lord, but it is not a potent. Now, potent, like the Supreme Lord, can exhibit many potencies, but the potency, like the spirit soul, cannot equal the potent at any stage. At the same time, one potency may be overcome by another potency, but to the potencies, all the potencies are under control. That means to the Supreme Lord, he has multiple energies. He can control one and the other, one to the other to the one, like that. But ultimately, he is the controller of all the energies. But the living entities are under the control of these energies. Maybe sometimes or of the inferior energy, sometimes of the superior energy. That's why we are called Tatastha Shakti or marginal energy. So the Jiva potency of the Lord has a tendency to be overpowered by the external potency of the Lord. That is the avidya. And this way, the soul is placed in awkward circumstances of material existence. That means this material existence which is there for us is not our natural situation. But somehow we are placed in an awkward position of this material existence. The living entity cannot be forgetful of his real identity unless influenced by this avidya potency. So we cannot forget our original spiritual identity of the spirit soul, but there is an avidya potency which exerts its influence on us, due to which we become attached to this material nature or material body. And because the living entity is prone to the influence of this avidya potency, he can never be equal to the supreme potent. That means being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, the spirit soul can never become equal to the Supreme Soul or the Supreme Lord. So conditioned souls like us are put into this prison house. The whole material world is called a prison house. So the conditioned souls like us are put into this prison house for reformation, so that after reformation, we are sent back to our original constitutional position, back to the spiritual world, to be placed in constitutional position as eternal servant of the Lord. But that is our constitutional position, to be always a servant to the Supreme Lord. But because we have got attached to this material body and material possessions, we are sent into this material world to reform ourselves. Next, number 6. Here, Vidura says, the Lord as the super soul is situated in every living being's heart. Why then do the living entities' activities result in misfortune and misery? See, this is a very important point. The Lord within the heart, there are two entities. The living entity as us, the spirit soul, and next to us is seated the Lord as the super soul or the Paramatma. So Vidura is asking, when the super soul himself, the Lord, is situated in our heart, how do the living entities or jivas like us, our activities result in misfortune and misery? So we are all suffering in this material world. Having come to this material world, we are going through the cycle of birth and death, old age and disease, and we are going through so much of miseries of life, but we don't realize that. But here, Vidura is asking, the Lord himself is seated next to our heart as the super soul. So how then our activities result in misfortune and misery? So many tend to ask, I am suffering so much in my life and I have got so many difficulties. Where is God? Why is he silent? So Lord is observing all these things. So here, question is, how come the Lord is silent when I am suffering? And if does God exist at all? Many say that we should not believe in God, because if God is there, why should we suffer? Or the other way of thinking is, if God is there, God must give this, God must give that, like to be like Krishna to be our ordered supplier. The Lord is not our, we are not here as order givers to the Lord, nor is the Lord here to take all the orders that we give. So there is a difference in that. So we want more and more and more and of everything. There is a small example given in the Shastra. There was one time a very saintly person who was standing outside a shoe shop for a very long time, watching the shop and also watching people coming in and going forth and so forth. So finally, one person saw the Swami and asked him, what is it that you are watching here for a long time? The Swami said, the purpose of a shoe or a chappal is to cover our feet and walk. That is all we wear the shoe for. There is nothing beyond that. The shoe cannot be worshipped and it cannot be used in any other part of the body. The shoes are to be worn in our feet only. And they are worn so that their feet don't get dusty, but the shoe takes the dust. But for taking the dust, there are so many varieties of shoes and there are so many varieties of people who get mesmerized to buy with their hard-earned money. See, people work very hard to get money, but then even buying for a very small thing like a shoe or a chappal, they get mesmerized seeing so many varieties and they're confused what to buy, where to buy, how to buy, and all those things. After all, the purpose of the shoe is to take the dust from the road and to enable us to walk. This is an illusion that we are all in. So in every case that we see, every activity that we see, we are in illusion in the process of our activities in this material world. So this body is considered to be a fruitful tree, and the Lord as the super soul is there. Example is given like two birds sitting in a tree. One bird is eating the fruit of the tree, and the other bird, the super soul, is observing the other bird which is eating that. That is, in terms of performing activities, we perform activities and we eat the fruits of the activities also. But the Lord as the super soul is observing how the individual soul is eating and trying to enjoy. Now, a citizen of a state may be in miseries for want of sufficient supervision by the state authorities. So Vidura is asking, how can it be possible that the citizen suffers? Some are suffering and some are not suffering. But the answer we'll discuss in the next few slokas. So Vidura is saying, how come this living entity is subjected to ignorance and covered by the influence of Maya when the Lord is physically present? The Lord is the Father. He is also the protector of every living entity. That's why the Lord is known as Bhuta Prith, or the maintainer of the living entities. So if the Lord is maintaining the living entities, why should the living entities be subjected to so many sufferings and misfortunes? But this is what we see in our day-to-day life. Then from now, text number 7, Vidura says, "O great and learned one, my mind is greatly illusioned by the distress of these nations, and I therefore request you to clear it up." So Vidura is asking that he is bewildered by seeing this, that the living entities are all suffering, and he wants this doubt to be cleared by Maitreya Rishi. So from the text number 8 onwards, Maitreya Rishi explains to Vidura as to how and why the living entities are subjected to the sufferings. He says in text number 8, Shishuka Uvacha Sa Itham Chodita Kshatra Tattva Suna Munihi Pratyaha Bhagavat Chittaha Smayan Gatasmayaha. The translation says, Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, O King Maitreya, being thus agitated by the inquisitive Vidura, at first seemed astonished, but then he replied to him without hesitation, since he was fully God conscious. That means Maitreya Rishi was immediately astonished by the questions that was asked by Vidura very inquisitively. But then he replied Vidura without any hesitation, because Maitreya Rishi was in full God conscious. It is not that Vidura was not a God conscious, but this conversation is taking place between both of them to clear the doubts that living entities like us might have. So many times a divine devotee might apparently express himself to be ignorant, but he is full in knowledge in every intricate matter of the science of God. So from text number 9 onwards, Maitreya replies, Maitreya vacha seyam bhagavato maya yan nayena viruddhate ishvarasya vimuktasya karpanyam utabandhanam. The translation says, see, Maitreya said, certain conditioned souls put forward the theory that the Supreme Brahman, or the personality of Godhead, is overcome by illusion or maya. At the same time, they maintain that he is unconditioned. This is against all logic. So Maitreya Rishi replied that some conditioned souls put forward a theory that the Lord is conditioned by this material world, is also overcome by illusion or maya. At the same time, some say that the Lord is not conditioned. So this does not look logical. So the notes it is given, purport it is given, that this material illusory energy is distinct from the spiritual energy. It is one of the many energies of the Lord. So there is a material energy and there is a spiritual energy. And there are different qualities of these energies. The energy and the energetic personality of Godhead are not different. And although such energy is one with the Lord is never overpowered by it. That means the Lord creates this energy, material energy and spiritual energy. The qualities of both the material and spiritual energies are different. But although all these are all energies created by the Lord, the energy is that cannot overpower the Lord, because ultimately the Lord is the creator of the energy. So the Lord is not overpowered by the energies. But the living entities, being part and parcel of the Lord, they are minute part and parcel. So they are overpowered by the material energy. So sometimes they are overpowered by the material energy, and generally they are overpowered by the material energy more than the spiritual energy. Sometimes we may be overpowered by the spiritual energy also. We might take up some spiritual activity, but then it's insignificant. That's why we are in this material world, life after life, birth after birth. So Srila Jiva Goswami and Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, they give a very nice example to explain this phenomenon. They say that although the sun is all light, sunshine is full of light, but still there are clouds, there are darkness and snowfall. All these are also part and parcel of the sun. Sun is the cause of cloud also. The sun is also the cause of darkness and also snowfall. So without the sun, there is no possibility of the skies being overcast with clouds and darkness, nor can there be snowfall on the earth. So without the sun, there cannot be darkness also. So because there is sun, there is a darkness. So similarly, there are clouds. These clouds can cover the vision of the living beings like us, but the clouds cannot cover the sun. The clouds actually cover our vision. So life is sustained by the sun. Life is also disturbed by the sun, by darkness. So this is a fact. This is an example. But the sun is never overcome by distress, darkness, or clouds. So just like sun is not overcome by darkness, the Lord is not overcome by darkness or by illusory potency, but we become covered by the illusory potency of the Lord. But those who have got a poor fund of knowledge, it is mentioned, they say that the sun is covered by a cloud, which is not fact. When we see, our vision is covered, but the sun is there, sun is not covered. Similarly, Supreme Personality of Godhead is always unaffected by the influence of the material energy, although it is one of these energies. The clouds, darkness, and snowfall can cover only a very insignificant portion of the sun's rays. So sun's rays are abundant, but cloud cannot cover the entire sun rays. Maybe a small portion of the sun rays it can cover. Similarly, the modes of material nature may react upon ray-like living entities like us. Just like sunshine does not, the clouds cannot cover the entire sunshine. Maya or illusory potency cannot cover the Supreme Lord, but it can cover insignificant rays like living entities like us. So it is a misfortune of a living entities that the influence of material energy acts on his pure consciousness, which is supposed to be full of eternal bliss of knowledge. So this covering of pure consciousness and eternal bliss is due to the avidya karma shakti, the energy which acts on the infinitesimal. Like I said, the Lord is infinite, but we are infinitesimal. And because we are infinitesimal, there is a tendency for us to misuse the minute independence. Also, according to Vishnu Purana, Bhagavad Gita, and other Vedic literatures, the living entities are generated from the Tatastha Shakti energy of the Lord. So, either we are in the marginal or either we are in the spiritual or in the material, but the Lord is completely spiritual. So, these are all energy of the Lord, and they are under the control of the Lord. The living entities are just like sun's rays. So there is no qualitative difference between the sun and its rays. The sun rays are sometimes overpowered by another energy of the sun, namely cloud or by snowfall. So one energy of the sun is sunshine, another energy is the cloud. Both are emanating from the sun, but one gets overpowered by the another energy, namely the clouds or by snowfall. Similarly, although the living entities are qualitatively one with the superior energy of the Lord, they have the tendency to be overpowered by the inferior material energy. So this is the way Vedic version given in all the scriptures. In Vedic hymns, it is said that living entities are like sparks of a fire. See, when there is a fire, we'll find lot of sparks around, and there is an original fire. But the moment the sparks leaves the original fire, it becomes invisible, but the original fire remains as the original fire. So this is the difference between the living entities and the Supreme Lord. We are like minute sparks, which we get lost in front of the original spark, which is the Supreme Lord himself. The sparks can everlastingly remain within the original fire as its part and parcel. But the moment the sparks become separated from the original fire, their misfortunes and miseries begin. So the moment we get separated from the Lord, then our misfortune and miseries start. So the clear conclusion is that the Supreme Lord, who is the original fire, is never overpowered. The Lord is not overpowered by his energies, but the infinitesimal sparks of fire like us can become overpowered by the effect of Maya. The Lord is the master of the material energy, but the living entities are under the control of the material energy. And we are in a conditioned stage. Many times a child might cry for asking for an object. The child might cry. Another example given is a child might cry asking for a moon. Now, mother cannot give a moon, but what she gives a mirror which can show a reflection of the moon. So the Lord gives a reflection of the original spiritual world in the form of this material world. So we want to enjoy it. So the Lord gives us a reflection of what is called the spiritual world, and that reflection is nothing but this material world that we are all in. This the Lord explains in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 7, text 12 and 13. He says that know that all states of being, be they of goodness, passion, or ignorance, are manifested by my energy. I am in one sense everything, but I am independent. I am not under the modes of material nature, for they, on the contrary, are within me. So the material world consisting of the three modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance, they are under the control of the Lord, but the Lord is independent. And the next sloka, the Lord says, deluded by the three modes, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. So the Lord is in the transcendental mode, transcendental, above the three modes of goodness and passion and ignorance, and the Lord is inexhaustible. We get exhausted, but the Lord does not get exhausted. Another example given is that when we stand in front of a mirror, we may be very clean. When the mirror is clean, the reflection that appears in the mirror is also very clean. But many times the mirror might be covered by dust. But when it is covered by dust, the reflection that we see in the mirror is also not very clear. So this is one example as to how living entities like us, we can be covered by the illusory energy. So similarly, the jivas are transcendental by nature. So originally, the spirit soul is transcendental by nature. But when they come to the material world, they are covered through this illusory energy of the Lord. The illusory energy is so powerful that even advanced souls who are in the spiritual activities are bewildered. Example is given that how Bharat Maharaj, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's mention of how Bharat Maharaj, at the fag end of his life, he got captivated by a deer. As we all know, Bharat Maharaj was a great devotee of the Lord, and he saw a small deer which was struggling, and he brought it to his home. Ultimately, over a period of time, we saw how he got captivated by the affection of the deer, that at the end of his life, he thought of the deer and he had to take the body of the deer. So similarly, this Lord Shiva, there is a pastime how he got bewildered by seeing the form of the Lord as Mohi Murti form. So all the even great personalities can get bewildered by this illusory energy of the Lord. But this illusion energy is an imitation of the reality in the spiritual world. That is why sometimes it is called a shadow. It's not the real. What is real exists in the spiritual world, and what we see here in this material world is just a small reflection of what exists in the spiritual world. There is another example that is given in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Once King Indra, he became very fearful because Lord as Narayana and Rishi were performing great austerities. And when somebody performs severe austerities, the first person to get fearful is King Indra, or the King of Heaven. He thinks that somebody is performing, so he may seize the heavenly kingdom. Not knowing this, what Indra did was Indra sent Cupid and his associates to disturb the penance of Narayana and Rishi. So through Cupid, Indra created a very sensuous atmosphere. Cupid attacked in the form of glances of beautiful women. Indra thought the Lord to be an ordinary enjoyer like himself. He did not know who he was. So he thought the Lord would be attracted by such beautiful women. The Lord understood that what Indra had performed. Instead of getting attracted by Cupid. On the other hand, the Lord spoke, "Do not fear, O mighty Madana, O wind god and wives of demigods. Rather, please accept these gifts I am offering you and kindly sanctify my ashram by your presence." So, on the other hand, Cupid and their followers were afraid of being powerfully cursed by the Lord. So, the demigods actually were praising the Lord by glorifying him by many verses. When the Lord actually manifested before their eyes, many women who came as a representative of King Indra, they were all astonished. On the other hand, the Lord told Indra that choose one of the women which I am giving you, which is who is suitable to you, and she'll be an ornament of women. And that is none other than Urvashi, who is always there with Indra. So the creation which was made by the Lord was much, much more attractive than what Indra created in the form of beautiful women. And that was none other than Urvashi. This is an example as to how the Lord is not overcome by the illusory potency created by him, but conditioned living entities, even up to those up to the position of Indra, can get carried away by the illusory potency of the Lord. Then we go to text number 10. The living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. So it's a very nice sloka, and good examples are given here. So living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. That means we are having an identity problem as to who we are, what we are. And because of that, what happens is that like in a dream, a person sees that his head is cut off. Now, example Srila Prabhupada gives is that a teacher in public in a school once threatened his student that he would cut off the student's head and he would hang it on the wall so that the child can see how his head has been cut off. Now, actually, it cannot happen because if the head is cut off, a child cannot see. But here, the example is given. The child actually became frightened and stopped this mischief. The child was very mischievous, like us. So the teacher taught the child that I will cut off your head and put it on the wall so that you can see that your head is cut off. Actually, the head can never be cut off. Similarly, the miseries of the pure soul and the disruption of the self-identification are managed by the external energy of the Lord, which controls those mischievous entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. So we are all mischievous living entities. We are identifying ourselves with the external energy of the Lord, and this energy controls mischievous living entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. So Lord has got a will and we have a will, and our will against the will of the Lord. So we are mischievous and we are put in here into this material world for reformation. So these activities are performed under the dictation of the illusion energy. So one's head cannot be cut off. So sometimes we might see in a dream, but the dream is not a reality. So if a person sees that his head has been cut off, that means he is in hallucination. So similarly, a living entity is eternally subordinate to the Supreme Lord. We are eternally subordinate means we are eternally servants of the Lord. There is no doubt about that. And he has this knowledge with him, but artificially he thinks that he is God himself. And although he is God, he has lost all his knowledge due to Maya. So many times we think that we have become God. Many think also that they have become God. Every day we will see a new person who comes out and claims himself to be God. But actually, this conception has no meaning at all. Just as there is no meaning to seeing one's own head cut off. So actually, there is no bondage or misery for the living entity, nor does he lose his pure knowledge. So the soul within us does not lose the knowledge also in his pure consciousness. When he thinks a little seriously about his position, he can understand that he is eternally subordinate to the Lord. It is a false illusion. Another example is given that many times a person might go to a cinema and see a cinema. And in a cinema, we see that many times some very nice, uh, joyous scenes might appear where the hero and heroine sing and all those things. And when we see them laughing, we also feel like laughing. But on the other hand, many times in a cinema, we might find a favorite hero of ours who might be killed. And when that happens, then the person who is observing, seeing the cinema might also start lamenting. And many times we see when people coming out of the cinema theaters, they may cry also. But actually, there is no truth in that cinema because it is actually a play that is being screened in the form of a cinema. This is another form of illusion that people get very easily into. Similarly, this illusion works to all the conditioned living entities like us. And life after life, living entity try to lord it over the material nature and become the lord of the material world. But there is no tangible result. See, life after life, we are performing activities to lord over this material nature. We think that everything belongs to me or mine, I and mine, I and mine. And in the process, we get entangled in this material world without any tangible result. If you see, if one comes to the last stages of his life, you ask anybody who is in his old age, he will explain that whatever I have struggled has been of no use for me because one's material wealth, his family, his possessions, nothing can come at the last stage of one's life. So finally, one gets frustrated and becomes of all these material activities. And then he says that I want to be one with the Lord and speculate with a lot of jugglery of words and without success. So this is the process by which the knowledge is covered. And because of this artificial rebellious activity of the conditioned souls, one is put into all kinds of troubles and miseries. And many times one thinks that I must become liberated from this material world. And that is, it is said that it is the last snare of Maya in which the living entity is entrapped. One cannot get liberated from this material world, but by performance of giving the solution, which will come in, will going through the discussion in the next few slokas, we'll know automatically liberation also comes through. So living entity's eternal position is to serve. Now, the constitutional position of a living entity is to serve. So either he serves Krishna or he serves Maya. One cannot remain without doing this service. We have to be engaged. We have got a material body, we have got senses, we have got mind, we have got intelligence. All these things are there functioning within the body. If somebody says that I want to sleep 24 hours a day, that can never happen. One has to perform some activity, some service. So the option is either one serves Krishna or one serves Maya. So the conclusion is that when a living entity is deprived of the eternal transcendental service to the Lord, he becomes illusioned in many ways. And because he is rebelled against the service of the Lord, he is put into the service of Maya. But he is still serving. But he is serving Maya, which is also an energy of the Lord. And when he wants to get out of service under material bondage, then he decides to become one with the Lord. But the best course, therefore, is to surrender unto the Lord and get rid of the illusory energy of Maya for good, as confirmed the Bhagavad Gita. The Lord himself says, Daivi Yesha Gunamai Mama Maya Duratya Mamaye Prapadyante Mayam Etam Dharantite. As the moon reflected on water appears, we go to the next sloka. As the moon reflected on water appears to the seer to tremble due to being associated with the quality of the water, so the self associated with matter appears to be qualified as water. So the Lord is compared here to the moon in the sky, and the living entities are compared to the reflection of the moon on water. So the moon is fixed in one place in the sky, but it does not quiver. But when you see a reflection on the matter, on the water, we see that the reflection is quivering like the moon. But actually the moon is fixed. the moon's reflection on the water should also not quiver. Now, moon is not quivering. Its reflection also should not quiver, but the living entity is associated with water. When the water quivers, the reflection also quivers. The water moves, but the moon does not move. So similarly, the living entities who are tainted by the material qualities like illusion, lamentation, and miseries, although pure in pure soul, such qualities are completely absent. That means it's just an example of having one's head cut off in a tree. The reflection of the moon on the water is the separated rays of the moon and not the actual moon. So we are not the actual Supreme Lord, but we are a reflection of the Supreme Lord. The separated part and parcels of the Lord are entangled in the water of material existence. And they have this quivering quality, whereas the Lord is the actual moon in the sky, which is not in touch with water. So this is a very nice example. So the moon is steady, the reflection also is steady, but when the water is steady, then the reflection is steady. But there's a tendency when the water moves, that reflection also quivers. Similarly, the living entities like us, when we come to this material world, we have a quivering quality, whereas the Lord does not have that quivering quality because the Lord does not come in touch with water. The light of the sun and the moon reflected on the matter makes the matter bright and praiseworthy. So here another nice example is given that the light of the sun and moon are actually different, but the light of the moon spread throughout the sky appears to be impersonal, but the moon planet is personal. So the light that emanates from the sun or moon looks impersonal, it does not have form, but the sun itself and the moon itself are personal and they have a form. Also, there is another important point mentioned here. The light of the moon on the Taj Mahal appears to be more beautiful than the same light in the wilderness. Now, different types of reflections are seen on the same light. The moonlight is the same, but when it is reflected on the Taj Mahal, it appears the light looks much more beautiful than the same light which appears in a forest. So the moonlight is the same, but the reflection is different. Similarly, the light of the Lord is equally distributed everywhere, but due to being differently received, it appears to be different. That means every living entity receives the light of the Lord differently. So the important point is that a living entity should be prepared to receive the mercy of the Lord. Mercy of the Lord is available to all the conditioned living entities, but it all depends on the person who is the recipient. He should be prepared to receive that mercy. Therefore, one should not conclude that the reflection of the moon on water is actually the whole moon. So when the water is still standing, then there is no quivering. So a more settled conditioned soul quivers less. But due to material connection, the quivering quality is more or less present everywhere. But a more conditioned soul, the tendency is to quiver is more. That means when a living entity is conditioned more, his tendency to associate with the material nature is more. But a soul who is not so much conditioned, his quivering quality is less. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur actually gives a very nice quote. He says that one should understand that nothing in the material world can bring happiness. If one can come to that understanding, that is the first step forward in spiritual life, which is true. There is nothing that can give eternal happiness in this material world. And if one comes to that understanding, then that is the first step for progress in spiritual life. Another example is given that rain pours everywhere. It's not different for every different person. But a person who goes to office, he looks at it as a burden. He says, this rain is a disturbance for me, I may get wet. But on the other hand, a farmer welcomes rain because his harvest is dependent on rainwater. Similarly, a teacher teaches a subject matter to all the students. The message is the same, but one who receives, they have a different interpretation. An intelligent student received it very nicely, and a student who may be poor may receive it in a different way. Text number 12. But that misconception of self-identity can be diminished gradually by the mercy of the personality of Godhead Vasudeva through the process of devotional service to the Lord in the mode of detachment. So there is a misconception in the sense we have a wrong identity. We have an identity problem. And this identity problem can be corrected by the personality of Godhead through the process of devotional service in the mode of detachment. So the quivering quality of material existence, which comes from identification of matter or thinking oneself to be matter, can be eradicated by the Lord when one starts performing devotional service to the Lord himself. Because when one performs devotional service to the Lord, one gets knowledge and detachment. One gets quickly detaches himself from the material conception of life. That is, one does not become associated. When one understands what is matter and what is spirit, one becomes detached and gets a real knowledge. And thereby one becomes free from the material winch which causes one to quiver. So only knowledge and devotional service can elevate one towards the path of liberation. That means when one gets knowledge, he starts putting the step into the path of liberation. So development of knowledge is the purpose of knowing is to understand who is the Lord and who are living entities like us. And one might have that knowledge, but without devotional service, that knowledge is also a fruitless labor, and one cannot get the desired result of. So by the process of devotional service, one develops automatically knowledge as well as detachment. So if one has knowledge but does not perform devotional service, which is a constitutional position, it's a fruitless labor. But by the process of devotional service, one can develop knowledge as well as detachment. So by knowledge, one develops attachment to the Lord, and by detachment, one becomes free from material miseries. So the Lord is pleased only by devotional service, and thus his mercy is realized by association with pure devotees of the Lord. So to perform devotional service, one must start to begin associating with pure devotees of the Lord. Pure devotees of the Lord are transcendental to all the material desires, including desire for fruitive activities or philosophical speculation. Only such association can release one from these quivering elements. Text number 13. When the senses are satisfied in the seer, the super soul, the personality of Godhead, and merge in him, all miseries are completely vanquished as after sound sleep. So when the senses are satisfied in the seer, that is the super soul, and the personality of Godhead, and merge in him, then all the miseries are completely vanished. So when the senses are engaged in satisfying the senses of the Lord, then all the miseries are completely vanquished, and one becomes just as if he has had a sound sleep. So this quivering quality of the living entity is described in this verse. So material existence is given for sense gratification. So this material world, we are given an opportunity along with the senses for sense gratification to realize whether we are getting happiness or not. The senses are the medium for these material activities, and they cause the quivering of a steady soul. The soul is steady in nature, but the soul starts quivering when the body is entangled with these material senses. Therefore, the senses are to be detached from all the material activities. So according to some impersonalists, the senses are stopped from work by merging into the impersonal Brahman. But the devotees, the senses cannot be stopped. The senses have to be engaged. But by engaging with the senses in the transcendental service of the Lord, then that is perfection of life. In either case, the activities of the senses are to be stopped by cultivation of knowledge, and if possible, they can be engaged in the service of the Lord. So the senses are transcendental in nature, but their activities become polluted when contaminated with matter. So the senses are pure in nature, but they get contaminated when associated with matter. So we have to treat the senses to cure this material disease. We cannot stop them from acting, but they have to be cured by the disease, and that disease is giving them a better engagement. So Srila Prabhupada always quotes Param Drishta Nivartate. So consciousness is active by nature and it cannot be stopped from working. Artificially stopping a mischievous child is not a real remedy, but the child has to be given some better engagement so that he will stop causing mischief. Same way, the mischievous activities of the senses can be stopped by engagement of the senses in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Example is given when the eyes are engaged in seeing the beautiful form of the Lord, the tongue engaged in tasting prasada or remnants of the footsteps offered to the Lord, the ears engaged in hearing the glories, the hands engaged in cleaning the temple, the legs in visiting the temples. And this way, all the senses can be engaged in transcendental variegatedness. There are so many varieties of activities that can be performed in devotional service. And when that one is situated in that platform, he becomes free from all the material entanglement. Now, the Lord, as the super soul residing in everyone's heart, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is far beyond this material creation. He is the seer of all our activities. He is observing all the activities performed by living entities. Our activities must be so transcendently saturated that the Lord will be kind enough to look on us favorably and engage us in his transcendental service. Then only can the sense be completely satisfied and no longer troubled by material attraction. So when one is constantly engaged in the service of the Lord, one does not get troubled by this material attraction. Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura, one of the acharyas from Sampradaya, he says, don't try to see the Lord, but serve the Lord in a way that the Lord wants to see you. So in text number 14, uh, Maitreya Rishi says, simply by chanting and hearing of the transcendental name, form, etc., of the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, one can achieve the cessation of unlimited miserable conditions. Therefore, what to speak of those who have attained attraction for serving the flavor of the dust of the Lord's lotus feet. So simply by the taking up the process of chanting and hearing of the name of the Lord, one can become free from all these miserable conditions. What to talk about those who want to serve the Lord's lotus feet naturally with positive attitude. So the two processes I recommend, there is two processes I recommend for the process of devotional service. One is the process of jnana or the process of philosophical understanding, and the other is of direct engagement in the process of devotional service in the service of the Lord. Of these, the most popular and the easiest method is devotional service, which is the best path for which one does not have to wait. The moment one starts performing devotional service, automatically one gets knowledge as well as detachment. And the first stage of the devotional service is the sadhana bhakti, or devotional service for the neophyte, which is rendered under the direction of a pure devotee who is a spiritual master. And the second stage is called raganuga bhakti, in which a mature devotee automatically takes to the various service of the Lord out of sincere attachment. So when one starts practicing sadhana bhakti on a gradual under the instructions of bona fide spiritual master, one will reach a stage of raganuga bhakti by which one automatically develops attachment for service to the Lord. So Maitreya Rishi gives the final answer to all the questions of Vidura. That devotional service, the ultimate means to mitigate all the miserable conditions of material existence. We go to text number 15. Time is less, so I'll try to cover the next 6 verses. Now, Vidura, now from text number 15 onwards, Vidura starts speaking to Maitreya Rishi, acknowledging his realizations and glorifying Maitreya Rishi. So in text number 15, Vidura says, "O powerful sage, my Lord, all my doubts about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities have now been removed by your convincing words. My mind is now perfectly entering into them." So from this verse onwards up to verse 20, Vidura actually congratulates Maitreya for giving his knowledge, giving the spiritual insight, and Vidura is sharing his realizations. So doubts about the relationships, our eternal relationship with the Lord, are created by mental speculation in different ways. So the Lord is the predominator, eternal predominator, and the living entities are eternally predominated. And the real knowledge of this relationship entails reviving the lost consciousness to the standard. And the process for such revival is devotional service to the Lord. So eternally we are predominated, and eternally the Lord is predominator. And this knowledge is the real knowledge by which one is situated in the original constitutional position. And the process to get this knowledge is devotional service. So getting knowledge from right authorities like Maitri Rishi, one can become situated in real knowledge, and thus the disturbed mind can be put back on a progressive path. Text 16. Vidura says, "O learned sage, your explanations are very good as they should be. Disturbances to the conditioned soul have no other basis than the movement of the external energy of the Lord." Very nice words, actually. Here, Vidura says that your explanations are very good as they should be, but the disturbance to the conditioned soul have no basis than the movement of the external energy of the Lord. The living entities' desire to become one with the Lord is the root cause of entire material manifestation. Otherwise, the Lord has no reason to create this material manifestation, even for his pastimes. Lord continues his pastime in the spiritual world. He does not have to create this material world, but he creates it for reformation of conditional souls like us. So the false attempt of the living entity to occupy the predominating position of the Lord is the cause of material bondage. And the conditioned soul's attempt to become one with the Lord is the last snare of Maya. So the false position of trying to dominate or become a predominator is the cause of this bondage. And that's why we are put into suffering. But with right knowledge and the process of devotion service, one can be put back into his original constitutional position. Then next sloka, Vidura says, both the lowest of fools and who is transcendental to all the intelligence enjoy happiness, whereas persons between them suffer the material pangs. So those who are fools and they highly knowledgeable transcendentalists, they enjoy happiness. Now here when it says lowest of fools means the example is given of a hog. People who are on the level of animal platform, example is given a hog. A hog leads a very degraded life, living in a filthy place, eating filth, but he thinks that he is enjoying life. Similarly, but the transcendentalists who have this, they also enjoy happiness, but they enjoy the real happiness. Whereas the hog does not enjoy the real happiness, but he thinks he is happy. But there are other class of men who are Paramahansas, who are really situated in the transcendental position, they enjoy the real happiness. But there are persons who are neither hogs or dogs, nor on the level of Paramahamsas. They feel the material pangs, and for them, inquiry about the absolute truth is necessary. So the hogs think that they're enjoying, but they're enjoying a false happiness. But the Paramahamsas, are true transcendentalists, they enjoy the real happiness. And there are persons who are in between, they actually are suffering the material pangs, and for them, inquiry of the absolute truth is necessary. That is Atato Brahma Jignasa. What is the purpose of life? Text number 18. Then he says, but my dear sir, I am obliged to you because I can understand that this material manifestation is without substance, although it appears real. I am confident that by serving your feet, it will be possible for me to give up the false idea. So here, the sufferings of the conditioned souls are superficial, just like having one's head cut off in a dream. But although this statement is theoretically true, it is very difficult for a common man to pursue or understand. So actually, there is no suffering for the soul. The soul does not go through a suffering, but due to false identification with the body, the so-called happiness and distress is experienced through the body, through the senses. So however, by serving the feet of a great transcendentalist like Maitreya Rishi, and by constantly associating with them, one is enabled to give up the false idea that the soul suffers. So actually the soul does not suffer, but the soul experiences suffering through the material body because one identifies with the body. The soul is free from happiness as well as suffering. Text number 19. By serving the feet of a spiritual master, one is enabled to develop transcendental ecstasy in the service of the God, the personality of Godhead, who is the unchangeable enemy of the Madhu demon, and whose service vanquishes one's material distresses. So the clue to come to the real happiness is given. One should serve the feet of a spiritual master, by which one can get real understanding of who he is, that he's a spirit soul, is not a material body. So the association of a bona fide spiritual master like Maitreya Rishi can be of help for achieving this perfection. The Lord is the enemy of the Madhu demon, or in other words, he is the enemy of the suffering of a pure, sincere devotee. The service to the Lord is rendered in various rasas. Text number 20. Persons whose austerity is meager can hardly obtain the service of the pure devotees who are progressing on the path back to Godhead, the Vaikuntha. The pure devotees engage 100% in glorifying the Lord, who is the Lord of the demigods and the control of living entities. So the point is that the path of liberation is to serve the great Mahatmas or transcendentalists. So the Mahatmas are pure devotees of the Lord, and they are on their path to Vaikuntha, the kingdom of God. And by chanting and hearing the glories of the Lord, then one can be situated in perfection. So this system of association has been recommended by time immemorial. And this age of Kali Yuga, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given a simple process, easy process of trying to be engaged in chanting and the holy name of the Lord and hearing the glories of the Lord, by which one is sure to make progress on the path back home, back to Godhead. And lastly, to conclude, the 21st verse, it says, after creating the total material energy, the Mahatattva, and thereby manifesting the gigantic universal form with senses and sense organs, the Supreme Lord enters into it. So Vidura then, after all this, further puts forward inquiries from Maitreya Rishi, which will be taken up by the next speaker during the next class. So we have seen how Vidura had doubts with Maitreya Rishi. Maitreya Rishi clarified all his doubts, and then again Vidura glorifies Maitreya Rishi by sharing his realizations, and he put forward further questions. So with this, I conclude the class for the day. I have extended by a few minutes, so I can take some questions or comments if any of you have. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Dandavat
Hare
Prabhuji.
Krishna Prabhu. Dandavat Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam.
Prabhuji,
Yes,
I have
Prabhu.
a question like
Yes.
the soul doesn't suffer the distress and this one happiness and distress. So and the perception is that we are in the body and soul is like thinking that I am the body itself. Okay, so
Pardon me, can you make it clear? Yes, your question is?
my question is that Prabhuji, like is that mind and intelligence is acting as a source to the soul that it is giving the information, or how it is
Actually,
taking
the soul, the soul is spiritual in nature, but we have this material body which also includes the mind as well as the intelligence. If you see, there are many eternally liberated souls. We see many pure devotees of the Lord, they come. If you see, they will never be disturbed irrespective of whatever it may be external circumstances, because they are situated on the spiritual platform. They are not associated with the material body like us. So it is our mind and our intelligence. Through our mind and intelligence, we are experiencing this happiness as well as suffering. The soul actually does not have this, but because we are attached to this body, we are experiencing it through the mind and our intelligence. Is it clear, Babu?
Okay. Means like soul is just observing, just what is done. It is like just observing what the mind.
The soul is not affected by whatever external things that happen. It's not affected at all. But the mind is creating the disturbance for us through this happiness and distress, through the senses.
Okay.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Yes, Mataji.
Prabhuji, after death, is intelligence also carried with us or not, Prabhuji?
Your voice is not clear. There's somewhere. Can you make it a little more clear? Loudness is there, but clarity is not there. Can you make
Okay,
it clear?
Prabhuji. Now,
Slowly.
now it is okay.
Yeah, now it is okay. Yes, ma'am. Tell me.
Prabhuji, after death, my intelligence also carried with the soul.
Yes. Yes.
After
When
going
one-
to eternal planet also, it will continue with us.
No. When the soul, as long as the soul is there in this material world taking up another body, it is covered with mind, intelligence, and false ego. The gross body is given up, but the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and false ego remains with the soul. But when one engages in pure devotional service, then automatically on the process, the soul, when it enters the spiritual world, it dissolves both the gross and subtle, both the bodies. That means even the mind and intelligence and false ego are dissolved in this material world itself. And just the soul goes back to the spiritual world, which is the original constitutional question.
Then what body will get, Prabhuji, if we go to spiritual world?
Spiritual body does not have an external material covering like us. So when we are placed in our constitutional position of serving the Lord, then automatically, even when you are in this material body, you will not have any attachment to this material body. So at the end of life, we give up this body and then the soul goes back to spiritual world. It's a spiritual body.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, can I just, like we have to understand it that it will not be a subtle soul, right, Prabhuji? Because it will not carry the subtle body. It will be a pure soul minus the subtle
It will
body.
be a pure soul without the gross and subtle body.
Subtle body. And Prabhuji, I had a doubt in the middle, but see, Prabhuji, the Lord is not attached. He's got no attachment. At all,
Yes.
right? But still, at the
Yes.
same time, he cares. He wants us back. He wants us everything. So we should remain unattached, doing our duty.
Yes.
Only then we can go back to him.
Yes, like I mentioned one of these verses, the Lord is giving all the opportunities for us, but it depends on the quality of the recipient. Like I mentioned that reflection on the Taj Mahal looks brighter, but on the reflection on a forest might not be as bright. So it depends on the quivering quality of the individual person. So somebody might be more conditioned, somebody might be less conditioned. So the recipient should make way for getting the mercy of the Lord. Lord's mercy is there. Just like rain, it rains for everybody. So we have to take it in the right perspective.
But the Lord remains unattached and
Yes.
you
Ultimately,
have to
we can artificially try to detach. But by the process of devotional service, one can automatically develop this detachment from all that is material of eye and mind.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, ma'am. Is that clear your question?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Krishna Prabhuji, one more doubt.
Yes,
Soon
ma'am.
after death,
Yes.
the body,
Yes.
the soul leaves the body. It will take
Yes.
time, or within a short time, it will take another body.
There are some process for atonement and those things that are given in the 12th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. It is not that immediately it takes place, but one who goes back to Godhead does not have to go to through the atonement process. Otherwise, one has to go through the atonement process, and there is a period that takes time. It is mentioned in the Garuda Purana. It is not immediate.
Okay, Prabhuji. Thank you. But
Yes,
we don't
ma'am.
know, no, Prabhuji, we go into a spiritual world. If whoever atonement means whatever takes place in the material world, we don't know. The soul don't know, no?
Yes. Like just like a reflection, we don't know what we are performing, isn't it? Are we performing sinful activity knowingly, purposely? So many things happen without our knowledge also. Similarly, if it has performed that sinful activity, but when one surrenders, we should not know, our goal should be clear that yes, I want to go back to the spiritual world, and we should take up the process of devotional service by the process of surrender to the Lord. Then the Lord is the father of all the children. Why will he not be interested in taking the children back home? So we don't have to know whether we are coming back to the material world or going back to the spiritual world. Automatically, when we are conditioned in this material world, we won't have an attachment to the Lord. We must have developed attachment to the Lord. At the same time, detachment to all that is material. If we have done that, then we can be sure of going back to the spiritual world. We don't have any doubt that I'll come back to this material world. But one must ask this question to oneself, whether I have developed that attachment to the Lord, which should result in detachment from all that is material. That much, I think, introspection one can do and understand. And these are all things that are possible with the association of pure devotees of the Lord.
Okay, Prabhuji, thank you.
Thank you, Mother. Anybody else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you very much.
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Good. Like, give yourselves a hand.
Any
So,
questions? Any
yes.
Hello.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare
Krishna,
Thank you
Prabhuji.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhujis and Matajis. I think, yes,